Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, October 21st. This is Africa 54.
Nigerian protesters against police brutality demand justice 1 year later. Sudanese protesters call for the government to be dissolved. And a French-African mom works to boost the numbers of African bone marrow donors.
Nigerian activists are gathering this week to demonstrate on the one-year anniversary of massive street rallies last year against police brutality. As Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja, many victims of police abuse say they have yet to see justice.
Obianuju Iloanya's brother Chijoke was 20 years old in November 2012 when members of Nigeria's notorious Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS, arrested him at a party in Anambra State, southeastern Nigeria. That was the last time she set eyes on him.
It was a child dedication. They were drinking and making us arrested everybody. That's not enough reason to kill anybody.
She says the SARS, often accused of torture, rape, and extrajudicial killings, was responsible for her brother's death. Issues involving the unit escalated last year, leading to street demonstrations demanding its disbandment. Days later, authorities dissolved the police unit, but nationwide protests continued and grew to include calls for better governance. The protest ended in a bloody shooting at the Lekki toll gate in Lagos. Amnesty International says 12 people were killed. This week, thousands of protesters across several Nigerian cities, including Abuja, remembered victims of police brutality 1 year after the End SARS protests. They also reignited calls for an end to police brutality.
That indeed, with resilience, with commitment, that we can surmount our fears and we can confront every issue that is bedeviling our nation with a view of making genuine corrections.
In the last year, authorities set up investigative panels and have been offering restitution to victims. A Lagos panel on Monday said it has awarded hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation to 70 out of more than 250 victims who came forward in the state. But activists say the process has been slow and no police officers who were guilty of abuse have been arrested.
Till compensation is paid to every victim who got awarded compensation at the panels, until arrests and prosecution is enforced for all the officers indicted by the panel, we cannot say justice has been achieved.
I know that as long as the Nigerian authorities refuse to bring justice and accountability for the crimes committed by its security forces, the agitations will continue.
In the meantime, victims and protesters say the memories and impact of police brutality will never go away. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
Protesters are calling for the Sudanese military to overthrow its civilian leaders amid what Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok is calling the worst and most dangerous crisis of a two-year transition from autocracy. David Doyle reports.
Hundreds gathered outside the presidential palace in Sudan's capital Khartoum on Tuesday, calling for the military to dissolve the government. The country is in the midst of what civilian Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok has called the worst and most dangerous crisis of a two-year transition from autocracy. Civilian politicians have been ruling in a fragile partnership with the military since President Omar al-Bashir was ousted in 2019. But relations have soured. After Bashir loyalists attempted a coup last month, civilian leaders have accused the military of trying to seize power. The protesters in Khartoum, such as Mohammed Abdul Qadir, accuse civilian political parties of mismanagement and monopolizing power.
We are sitting here with our tents, our pots, our animals and our meat. We are sitting here until Hamdok finds us a solution. Either he leaves or his cabinet leaves or the story ends. We are staying here, and just like we removed 30 years of rule, we will remove 2 years of rule.
The crowds have been assembled by a coalition of rebel groups and political parties who have aligned themselves with the military. After an emergency meeting on Monday, Sudan's cabinet said a crisis unit was being formed, with the aim of bringing all sides together to find a solution. Pro-civilian political parties are planning their own demonstration on Thursday, the anniversary of a 1964 revolution.
David Doyle, Reuters filed that report. Rwandan prosecutors say they will appeal a 25-year prison sentence handed to Paul Rusesabagina, a one-time hotel manager portrayed as a hero in a Hollywood film about the 1994 Rwanda genocide. Prosecutors had sought a life sentence for the 67-year-old Rusesabagina, a vocal critic of President Paul Kagame. A Rwandan court found him guilty of terrorism charges in September following a trial that his supporters branded a sham and proof of Kagame's ruthless treatment of political opponents. A statement tweeted by the Prosecutor's General's office did not say why it was making the appeal. Neither the Prosecutor's General's office or the Rwandan government could immediately be reached for comment on the matter. Suspected Islamist militants killed 16 people and torched houses late Wednesday in an Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo village, according to a witness and a civil society leader. An army spokesman said early Thursday that a combat patrol unit had clashed with the rebels, but gave no further details. Mumbere Meleki Molala, coordinator of a local human rights network, confirmed the death toll and blamed the attack on the Allied Democratic Forces, a Ugandan armed group active in the region. The ADF has operated in the dense forests near the Ugandan border for more than 30 years and began killing civilians in large numbers in 2014. In late 2019, the Congolese army launched a large-scale operation against the ADF, triggering a violent backlash. Kenya has told the United Nations it will close by June 2022 the massive Dadaab and Kakuma refugee camps holding over 410,000 refugees who fled from wars in the East and Horn of Africa. Kenya says it plans to repatriate some refugees and grant others residency. The UN Refugee Agency replied by asking the government to ensure that vulnerable refugees would still be protected under its timeline for the closure. In an interview with Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori, Irongo Houghton, the director of Amnesty International Kenya, says it's important for Kenya to factor in the human rights dimension to the refugee camp closures.
I mean, I think the first thing Amnesty International would concur is that long-term camps, 20, 30 years in the case of Dadaab and Kakuma, are not the solution. That ultimately the solution is for refugees to either be safe to return to their countries of origin. Of course, this has to be voluntary under the international, under international law. But secondly, that they have the opportunity to integrate in the countries in which they are settled. And, I think as we now look to the 2022 June deadline that has been set, this is the new deadline that has been set by the government of Kenya, the question that we have to ask of the government of Kenya is essentially whether they can create the conditions for those refugees that have been in Kenya since they were born. And if you think about it, there's at least probably 2 generations of refugees that know no other country, and essentially repatriating them to their so-called countries of origin essentially is to take them to places and homes that they have never known. That ultimately for them, can they be given the option of integrating into Kenya and essentially choosing to become Kenyans and be naturalized in that respect rather than returning to the countries of their grandparents.
And some have actually said that has been the challenge of the government of Kenya, even in fact, as compared to Uganda and even Tanzania, that there was no policy of allowing a person to potentially become a permanent resident or even a citizen of Kenya. So should that have been even maybe the initial discussion?
No, I think it is definitely the topical discussion now. This is the conversation we need to have with the government of Kenya. I think from the donor community and from the diplomatic community in the United Nations, support should be provided for this course of action. I traveled 1 month ago to Turkana, Lodwar, to meet with the Turkana County Governor and his cabinet. And I asked him that question. I said, you have been extremely successful in reducing tensions between the South Sudanese, the Ugandan and other refugees in Kakuma with the local Turkana population. What is the secret? What is the model that we could offer the rest of the country? And he said, no, it is very simple. It is integration. It is integration. Because what you can do then is you can begin to shrink the camps and essentially give the camps a focus on the new refugees, the people who are coming across from Tigray, Ethiopia, the people who are trying to avoid violence in South Sudan, rather than essentially mingling them with people who, for all intensive purposes, know Kenya as their home. And I think that would be the progressive step to take before June next year.
Yes, I know. I did listen to one young man say he was born in Kakuma refugee camp. He doesn't know any other home. That's home to him. Now, when you talk about Dadaab specifically, it's very close to the border with Somalia. Kenya has had issues of insecurity with Somalia. Now, one of the arguments Kenya has put forth is that it's a potential, or it has been in some cases, a source of Al-Shabaab operatives. And so it needs to be closed down for security reasons. How do you make an argument against that?
Well, I mean, I think there is some validity in terms of ensuring that not just Kenyans, but refugees are safe from terrorism and extremism. So it's not just that the whole camp is full of extremists. It's really that the extremists will hide among the refugees in the camp. Essentially, what has been very successful with the government over the years has been to invest a lot in civic intelligence, to increase the levels of awareness and counter-violent extremism training among not just Kenyans, but also among refugees as well. And that's how you win the war against terrorists. You don't win the war against terrorists by closing camps and sending hundreds of thousands of people back into Somalia without any capacity to sustain themselves or to make, to be able to develop their own livelihoods. If anything, you are just sending them into an environment in which they will be radicalized. And of course, now they can come back, having spent their time in Kenya and understand Kenya, and be an even bigger threat. I think the way that you do this is you essentially create development programs that leave many of the refugees with a sense of being vested in the future of Kenya. And really that Kenya, for these many, many years, has been a sanctuary country and a sanctuary nation for millions of people. And many of them now are even congressmen and women and senators in the United States of America. So it is the case that, broadly speaking, the refugee experience in Kenya has been a success, not a failure.
Yeah. And finally, on this issue, Kenya should be having a good conversation with the UN, because first, it has actually at least been sitting close to the Security Council, and also the fact that these camps are managed by the United Nations. What kind of help can the international community, the United Nations, give to Kenya to better manage these camps or close them in a more organized way that will be fair, humane, and also just acceptable internationally?
Unfortunately, despite the misery and the trauma of communities and families in flight, global humanitarian programs are grossly underfunded. And there is an expectation, I think, on the Biden-Harris administration that they will increase their funding. For many years, global humanitarian funding has really relied on a handful of countries, particularly countries like Sweden, much smaller than some of the richer countries. But I think this is what Kenya could use its moment on the Security Council to press for.
That was Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori speaking with Irongo Houghton, the director of Amnesty International Kenya. A top United Nations official for Central Africa recently visited the Lake Chad Basin to assess living conditions in the area. Years of attacks by Boko Haram have left much of the infrastructure there in ruins. Civilians are now asking for assistance in their fight against poverty. Francois Lausine Fall, the UN Secretary General's Special Representative in Central Africa, says Secretary General Antonio Guterres sent him to the region to evaluate the needs of communities recovering in the areas where Boko Haram was active. Fall says the UN is mobilizing the international community to support the multinational Joint Task Force, a regional military alliance, as it fights against the extremist group for a lasting peace to return. He says he is also visiting Cameroon, Chad, Nigeria, and Niger to assess ways to start rebuilding and focus on reducing poverty. Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, why is it now so difficult for Americans to find certain goods? We'll explain after this short break. Welcome back to Africa 54. A French woman of African origin is leading a campaign to encourage more members of France's African diaspora to register as bone marrow donors, a move that can potentially save lives. Elhami Lacour filed this report, narrated by Michael Lepin.
Corinne Tonnier is a mother who lost her 13-year-old son Ulysse to a rare blood disease 9 years ago. His only hope for a cure was a bone marrow transplant. But with so few members of France's African diaspora registering as donors, no compatible match was found. So Tonnier created an organization in Ulysses' memory and organized this football match in a Paris suburb in September to raise awareness of France's need for more ethnic African donors. For Tonnier, the need is urgent.
I have a second son who also has a rare blood disease that will require a bone marrow transplant. For now, he's trying to hold on. Unfortunately, today, there is no suitable donor in the registry for him.
The French government's biomedicine agency says African origin donors are underrepresented not only in the French registry, but in all global registries. Only 2 African countries have bone marrow donor registries accredited by the World Marrow Donor Association, Nigeria and South Africa. Experts say it is especially hard for Black patients to find compatible donors of African origin because Africans have a greater genetic diversity than other groups like Caucasians. Françoise Audat, a French doctor specializing in blood disorders, is helping Tonnier to highlight these issues.
We try to register African donors all over the world, but the proportion of Africans in some countries is not very high, so it takes a lot of volunteers to find a compatible donor. One could imagine having registries in Africa with more donors to provide bone marrow to compatriots in diaspora communities around the world. But the problem is political instability, which makes communication difficult.
Without more African donors, a patient such as Tonye's son Thomas has only a small chance of finding a match. The French Biomedicine Agency says the likelihood of any individual patient being compatible with a bone marrow donor chosen randomly from the world's registries is just 1 in 1 million. For Elam Lecoeur in Paris, Michael Lippin, VOA News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making a major push for democracy on his first journey to South America. He is visiting two stable democracies, Ecuador and Colombia, at a time of rising violence, authoritarianism and populism in the region. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken praised the stable democracies of Colombia and Ecuador on Wednesday, even though he arrived in Ecuador just as new President Guillermo Lasso declared a state of emergency to combat drug-related violence. Blinken said the Biden administration realizes that in the past, the U.S. has focused too much on training and equipping security forces and promoting democratic elections in the region, and not enough on boosting people's economic well-being.
Now, this should be obvious, but the reality is we've often put more energy into strengthening civil and political rights, as vital and important as they are. Free and fair elections, the rule of law, freedom of speech and assembly, and less into strengthening people's economic and social rights, like bolstering labor standards, expanding access to adequate education and health, providing more inclusive opportunities.
Blinken also received a warm welcome in Bogota, Colombia, from President Iván Duque. Duque was criticized after Colombian forces had killed dozens of anti-government protesters this year. But as Benjamin Gadan of the Wilson Center told VOA, Colombia is a critical U.S. ally in the region.
Colombia is a longtime United States ally in a very difficult part of Latin America. Of course, its neighbor, Venezuela, is a failed state and a deeply repressive dictatorship. The result has been almost 6 million Venezuelans fleeing in recent years, and perhaps half of them have settled in neighboring Colombia.
The political impasse in Venezuela and the resulting humanitarian crisis were high on the agenda at both of Blinken's stops. That partly explains why Blinken focused on the urgency of promoting democracy in the region, as Gadan explains.
But in reality, Latin America is living through a real democratic crisis right now. Nicaragua, Venezuela, of course, Cuba are all authoritarian right now, and countries like El Salvador are moving in that direction. Even Brazil has shown some warning signs lately about the respect for independent judiciaries and other democratic institutions.
Governments not able to deliver economically contribute to the migration crisis we are witnessing and make Blinken's push for democracy even more timely, Keith Mines of the United States Institute of Peace told VOA.
There's the kind of low-functioning democracies in other parts of Central America that are not able to provide fully for their citizens, and leads to migration crises and things like that. And then, of course, the failed democracy of Haiti, which is just one that has kind of left the realm of functionality altogether.
Mines said China is promoting a very different model.
China is kind of selling the Vietnamese model. Don't worry so much about this democracy nonsense. Just trade with us, get a high-functioning economy and a bunch of infrastructure in return, and that should be good enough. So why worry? Why obsess over democracy?
Secretary Blinken said the United States is not trying to force any country to choose between it and China, but it is seeking to promote the highest possible standards for human rights and living and working conditions for all citizens of the Americas. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
China is the center of manufacturing for the world. So when COVID-19 hit, manufacturing was disrupted. Production delays gave way to shipping delays. Now it is difficult and sometimes impossible to get certain items. VOA's Caroline Persutti takes a look at what is missing.
Lunch is on at the Green Pig Bistro. It could shape up to be the busiest Saturday in the Virginia restaurant's 10-year history. Customers are back. But beyond the dishes, other things are missing for head chef Tracy O'Grady. An induction burner.
We've been waiting for the part for 2.5 months.
And 4 months for a wine cooler.
It could be on a boat, it could still be in the factory, it could be at a port, it could be on a semi.
COVID-19 has created a major delay in products from China. Also, bottlenecks at American ports have forced dozens of container ships to sit offshore. With no workers to unload and no available warehouse space, there is no path to get products to consumers. It seems most Americans are waiting for something.
Our building has an HVAC system that needs repair, and we've been waiting 2 weeks for the parts, and they're still not here. Same thing with the hot tub on the rooftop building.
These moms worry about Christmas gifts.
I've been trying to get the PS5 for over a year, and there's like blogs that are like where you can find it, and they like come up and say it's available, and by the time you go to the site, they're all gone.
Add to that bicycles, cars, sneakers, and electronics.
Screens, tablets, computers.
James Sampson owns a chain of wireless RXX stores in the Washington, D.C. area. Almost all his components are shipped from China. What used to take 3 to 5 days now takes up to 8 weeks.
It's affecting our end customer. It's affecting the pricing that we have to give to customers because shipping prices are going up. And it's affecting the time we can actually complete repairs.
As a small business owner, Sampson says he can't compete with the huge national chains that are now contracting their own container ships.
It's going to have some long-term effects on us, without a doubt.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
President Joe Biden says California ports have agreed to operate around the clock, including weekends, to clear out the logjam. Beyond that, he says the U.S. needs to invest in the U.S.
Never again should our country and our economy be unable to make critical products we need because we don't have access to materials to make that product.
Chef O'Grady agrees, but for now, she has to rely on the global economy.
I'm not certain that it affects our bottom line, but it certainly affects our stress level. And it takes me away from things that I really need to be doing.
Like whipping up dishes, not chasing down missing equipment. Carolyn Crisuti, VOA News, Arlington, Virginia.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.